Hi, I'm Ann, and I am the owner of CareWorks Health Services. We are a caregiving agency based in Orange County, California. And today I want to go over the top questions you should ask every single agency when you're ready to hire someone to take care of your loved one. And actually, I would even recommend interviewing 2 or 3 of them. These are important questions to ask because there are some major differences in agencies that you may not be aware of because, let's be real, who spends time researching agencies unless it's absolutely the time to do it? And there are differences between agencies, a registry, or a referral type of placement company. And so it's really important that you ask all these questions. It can be quite lengthy, and so we'll break it down for you, and I'll give you some reasons why you should ask each one of these questions. And so let's go ahead and get started. How long have they been in business? And can you interview the caregiver before starting care services? It's important because obviously the length of time the agency has been in business is going to be a big indicator on how many caregivers they have to, when I say pull from, it's that these are caregivers that have been interviewed and screened by the company. And so if an agency is brand new, they may only have the opportunity to interview 3 or 4 caregivers. So, and what may happen is that if the caregivers are sick, they may not have enough to pull from, and so you may be the one who ends up having to provide care services. Is the caregiver reliability in writing? And kind of what that means is that if the caregiver can't show up, is the agency going to have somebody else in place? What is their contingency plan if the caregiver is sick? And so does the agency customize and personalize the plan based on what your parents' needs are? You know, we're all our own unique individuals, and often many agencies will just send a caregiver out who only knows how to do companionship, but maybe neglecting other needs that your mom or dad may have. If there's memory loss, does the agency have caregivers who are experienced in taking care of someone who is forgetful and may need a lot of cueing and reminders throughout the day? Also, what type of care is provided? This can get kind of confusing when you look up home care. Many families confuse home care with home health. They may also confuse that with palliative and hospice care. Make sure that when you ask the agency, do you provide home care services? What does that entail? It should entail things like bathing and dressing, feeding, helping someone get in and out of a chair, in and out of bed, on and off a toilet. So those are some of the services that home care provides. One really important question to ask the agency is what are your minimum number of hours? Is there a contract to this period of time? So is it a 4-hour minimum for a shift? Some agencies require a 20-hour minimum. Some may require 40 hours. Some may require a 1-week cancellation notice. It's really important to know these questions because if you're not happy with the agency or your parents don't need that amount of hours of care, you don't want to be stuck in a contract and have to pay out for 2 weeks before you can leave the service. How many hours is a minimum per day or per shift? What's the minimum per week? And and then the next question you should be asking is, how soon can you start? Most agencies should be able to start within 24 hours. Some agencies may require more time depending on how many caregivers they have or how short-staffed they are. So that's one really important question you have to ask. One of the big differentiators, I had mentioned this earlier, with registries, with placement agencies, and licensed home care agencies are that, let's see if I can make this as simple as possible. A home care agency employs their caregivers. Now, some home care agencies may moonlight as a registry, which means that they find the caregivers and they send them to you, but you're ultimately responsible for paying the employment taxes. Are you a home care agency that's licensed and bonded? So that's another question to ask. Are you a caregiving agency that employs its caregivers, or do you use contractors? Now, if you hear the word contractor, that agency is telling you you're responsible for paying the taxes of the caregiver, and they may say that they're 1099. Just as a kind of a heads up, the IRS does not count caregivers as a 1099 contractor. They count them as your employee. And basically, if you control their hours, you tell them what to do, when to do it, where to do it, and how to do the job. That makes you their employer. And you don't want to open up the can of worms by making that caregiver a 1099 contractor. How many caregivers do you have that are available for last minute, for emergencies, for that call off, for those who are sick? And so these questions so far are addressing like the services the agency provides. And moving on to the next series of questions, we're going to talk about service quality and ask a question: how are the caregivers supervised, and are they supervised? Does the agency have a person that comes out and does what we call as QA visits, which stands for quality assurance, or unannounced supervised visits? Is there a written plan of care for services? Is there something that the agency puts out for the caregiver to read and understand to know what is expected on the job? And also, how does the agency handle complaints? If you're not happy with the services, who's responsible to take your call? Is it the owner? Is it the supervisor? Is it the manager? As well as, what happens if something were to happen on the job, or if you are dissatisfied, who's going to take that call? These next set of questions, we're going to talk about caregiver qualifications, their training, their licensing, their background. You have to ask the agency, how are the caregivers screened? How are they trained? Not all agencies are the same. So one of the screening questions you should ask is, do you drug screen your caregivers? And the reason why I ask that is here in California, drug screening is not required by any agency. We drug screen our caregivers because we have an agreement and partnership with the VA hospital in which we provide services to veterans paid by the VA hospital. So as of today, there is only about 23 some agencies that have the contract with specifically the Long Beach Hospital. Now, what that means is that it holds us to a higher performance expectation. We have to drug screen caregivers. Any caregiver that tests positive, now again in California, marijuana is legal, but it's still considered an illegal drug federally. And because we're paid by the federal government, we abide by the federal laws. And so you can know that with our agency, all caregivers are drug-free. The next question is that how do they background check their caregivers? Currently, the standard is what's called a live scan, which screens the caregivers for not only crimes with the Department of Justice by the FBI, and it takes a look at their entire history, versus a typical background check that a company may run on you 7 years, and that's 7 years from the date that the person has finished their either their prison sentence or their time in jail, or if it stays on the record for 2 years, it's at the end of that period does a 7-year start. Now, again, this is also tying back to registries. If you use a registry or placement agency, these two types of agencies are not required to do background checks because the caregiver is not their employee. As simple as that. And so a registry may say, we background check all of our employees. What they mean by that often is that their office staff is their employees, so they may do a background check on them. But because the caregiver is not their employee, they really don't have like a right to background check them. And with caregiver training, find out if the caregiver has CPR training, if they have any infection control, what are the training requirements of the caregiver from the agency. And the last question in this series of training questions are, can you furnish references for the caregivers? How do I know this caregiver is any good? And to wrap this up, the final set of questions you should be asking the agency is about financing and payment. So the first question in this area is, what type of payments does the agency accept? Do they accept check? Do they accept credit cards? What types of insurance do they accept? If you have long-term care insurance, you should definitely ask if the agency will accept assignment of benefits. What that means to you is that the caregiver services, the agency will take care of all the billing, they'll take care of invoicing, the care notes, the timesheets. This is really important because assignment of benefits basically puts the burden on the agency to process the paperwork, to submit the care notes, submit the timesheets, and basically kind of puts us responsible for basically chasing down the insurance company for payments. Now, after doing this for 10 years, I've sort of gotten used to all the tricks and the different ways the insurance companies try to get out of paying, even though the services have been approved and benefits have been approved. Ask the agency, do they pay for the caregiver's Social Security? Do they pay for workers' comp insurance? Again, those two questions will be a big indicator on if the caregiver is an employee of the agency or if they are part of the registry and that you may be responsible for that. Because essentially, based on the pricing, a caregiver who's employed with the agency will typically be more, the rate will be higher versus if they are, I want to use 1099, but if they are not an employee, then the rate will typically be lower because you're not paying for those other fees, payroll liabilities, workers' comp, and Social Security taxes. Find out what overtime is. In California, and for specifically the caregiving class code, anything over 9 hours is considered overtime, or 40 hours in a week is considered overtime. So if a caregiver works over 9 hours, then they're due time and a half. If they are working as a private caregiver for you and you're not sure who's paying the payroll taxes, it would be better to be cautious and pay them time and a half when they do over 9 hours. It's just a recommendation based on some of the lawsuits and some of the things I've seen have come across. Always, again, better to err on the side of caution on this one. What are the costs if there's any transportation involved, if there's any extra fees that they may charge for doing laundry or for additional housekeeping work? Usually most of the services should be included in the rate, short of driving. If the caregiver is driving the client's car, then obviously no mileage is incurred. But if the caregiver is taking your mom or dad in their car, you may have to pay for some mileage, but definitely check with the agency on that. Also good to check with the agency if they have caregivers that drive. Not all agencies offer that, and so it's an important thing to know. And finally, to wrap it up, is that the last two questions you should ask the agency are, do they charge to help with long-term care insurance filing? Our agency doesn't. We include that as part of our services. Some agencies may charge, an extra $1 or $2 per hour to process this paperwork. Some may not offer assignment of benefits at all. And when they don't offer it, it's usually because long-term care insurance companies typically take anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks to pay the agency. And then when a supervisor comes out, do they charge for those services? Do they charge any extra fees for any other services, what they call typical care management services? It may be refilling medication box. It may be going out and running miscellaneous errands that are not pertaining to the care when a supervisor has to come out. And so I hope today was really helpful in giving you everything that you need to know when you start interviewing agencies. Now, it was a lot of questions, so down below I've included a link to a PDF form that you can print out if you're in Orange County and you are looking for a caregiver and you've gone through a couple of agencies, or this is your first time and you do need help or you want our help. I would love to hear from you. My name is Anne. I have a team. We're around 24/7 and we're always happy to answer any questions you have, guide you to the resources that you may need, and just basically be of help. So thank you so much for coming by and spending some time with me today, and have a nice day.